Some days start just like any other. The sun comes up, you grab your coffee, and you head off to do a job. You think you know what the day holds. You've got a routine, a plan. You know the risks, or at least, you think you do. But every now and then, the universe decides to throw a curveball so wild, so completely out of left field, that it rewrites the rulebook. That's what happened on November 20th, 1980, in southern Louisiana. On the surface, it was just another Thursday. For the folks working on and under Lake Peigneur, it was a day that would start with the familiar hum of machinery and end with a story so bizarre, you'd swear someone made it up for a Hollywood disaster flick. Imagine the scene, a calm, shallow lake just 10 feet deep in most places, shimmering under the morning sun. It's a popular spot for fishing, a quiet piece of nature surrounded by lush botanical gardens. But beneath that tranquil surface, a whole different world was buzzing with activity. A team from Texaco was out on a drilling rig, punching a hole into the lake bed, searching for that black gold, oil. They were doing a job that's been done a million times before. It's a dirty job, a tough job, but a necessary one. They had their maps, their equipment, and their expertise. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, just about everything. Down below, deep under the mud and clay of the lake bottom, was another operation entirely. Miners from the Diamond Crystal Salt Company were busy at work. They were hundreds of feet underground, carving out massive caverns from a gigantic salt dome that had been sitting there for millions of years. Think of it like a giant underground city made of salt. These guys were tough, experienced miners blasting and hauling salt in a dark subterranean world. Two different crews, two different companies working in the same location but in completely separate worlds. Or so they thought. On that particular morning, everything felt normal. The fishermen were out, the oil rig was drilling, and the miners were toiling away. There was no warning, no sign that Mother Nature was about to put on one of the most spectacular and terrifying shows in modern history. No one on that lake or under it had any idea that they were just a few hours away from witnessing the impossible. The day of the disaster started like any other for the crew on the Texaco oil rig. It was noisy, messy work. The drill bit, a 14-inch diamond-tipped monster, was grinding its way through the earth. The plan was to reach a target depth of over 12,000 feet. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, things started to get weird. The drill, now about 1,225 feet down, suddenly seized up. It was stuck. Solid. This isn't entirely uncommon in the oil business, drill bits get stuck. But this was different. The men on the rig floor felt a series of loud, unnerving pops and bangs from deep below. What they didn't know was that their multi-million-dollar drill bit had just made a catastrophic mistake. Instead of drilling alongside the salt mine, it had drilled directly into it. The geological maps were wrong. The coordinates were off. That 14-inch hole had just punched through the roof of one of the highest caverns in the Diamond Crystal Salt Mine. This was the point of no return. Down in the salt mine, chaos erupted. The moment the drill broke through, water began pouring in. At first it was a manageable stream, but as the fresh water dissolved the salt, the hole grew exponentially. A trickle became a torrent and the torrent became a waterfall. Leonce Viator, a mine electrician, was working nearby and saw it happen. He watched the water pour in and knew instantly that this was a disaster beyond anything they had ever prepared for. The mine had an evacuation plan, but it was designed for things like fires or cave-ins, not for the entire lake above them deciding to pay a visit. The alarm was sounded, and the race to escape began. 51 miners were on duty that morning, spread throughout the vast network of tunnels and caverns. The foreman, through a crackling PA system, gave the order, "Get out, everybody get out." The miners didn't hesitate. They abandoned their equipment, their half-finished work, and scrambled for the main elevator shaft. They moved through the dark tunnels as the sound of rushing water grew louder and more terrifying. The air pressure in the mine began to change, creating a powerful wind that howled through the corridors, kicking up salt dust and making it hard to see. It was a race against a clock they couldn't see, a desperate scramble to reach the single elevator that could lift them to safety. Up on the surface, the situation was just as dire. The oil rig crew had abandoned their tilting platform, scrambling onto a nearby crew boat just moments before the massive structure gave way. They watched in horror as the multi-million-dollar rig, their workplace, slowly capsized and sank beneath the water. But the lake wasn't just swallowing the rig. A small whirlpool had formed right where the rig had been. It started small, like when you pull the plug in a bathtub. But this was no bathtub. This was a 1,300-acre lake, and the drain was getting bigger every second. The placid, calm water was beginning to move with a strange and terrifying purpose. The few fishermen and sightseers who were on the lake that morning watched in utter confusion. What was happening? The water level was dropping and a vortex was forming in the middle of the lake. It was something out of a science fiction movie. The water was spinning faster and faster, creating a funnel that was sucking everything towards it. The initial confusion quickly turned to raw panic. Boats that were moored to the shore were being pulled away from their docks, drawn inexorably toward the growing whirlpool. The laws of nature had been turned upside down, and Lake Peigneur was draining itself into the earth. The whirlpool was no longer just a curiosity, it had become a monster. The initial funnel, just a few feet across, grew with terrifying speed as the mine hole widened. Soon it was a vortex of immense power, hundreds of feet across, a swirling muddy maw in the center of the lake. The sound was deafening, a thunderous, grinding roar of billions of gallons of water being funneled into the earth. Mud being sucked down, rock tumbling into the hole, trees ripped toward the vortex. The suction was so powerful it ripped apart the very land around the lake. Chunks of Jefferson Island, acres at a time, were calving off and being swallowed whole. Imagine watching this from the shore. You see a tugboat, a 65-foot vessel, get caught in the current. Its engine is powerless against the pull of the vortex. It gets dragged, stern first, towards the center. For a moment it teeters on the edge of the funnel and then, with a sickening lurch, it's pulled down and vanishes. Then another boat goes, and another. In total, 11 barges vanished, many of them loaded with supplies for the mine and oil rig. In just 3 hours, the entire lake was gone, all 3 billion gallons of it. What was once a shimmering body of water was now a vast, swirling mud pit with a deep, gurgling hole at its center. The scene was apocalyptic. The once thriving ecosystem was destroyed in an instant. Fish were left flopping in the mud. The sheer speed of the event was what made it so shocking. A geological feature that had been stable for thousands of years was undone in less time than it takes to watch a movie. The Delcombre Canal, a man-made channel that connected Lake Peigneur to the Gulf of Mexico, suddenly and impossibly reversed its flow. Normally the canal flowed from the lake out to the Gulf, but with the lake now sitting at a lower elevation than sea level, the Gulf of Mexico began to flow inland. The canal, about 12 miles long, became a raging river flowing backward. It pulled salty Gulf water towards the newly formed chasm. This had never happened before. A few days after the main event, the backward-flowing canal created Louisiana's tallest waterfall, a 50-foot drop. Water from the Gulf of Mexico poured into the now empty basin of Lake Peigneur. The fresh water of the lake was gone, drained into the earth. Now, the salt water of the ocean was rushing in to take its place. The disaster was not just about destruction, it was about a complete and radical transformation of the environment. The reverse flow dislodged more barges, even ones moored safely in the canal, and dragged them into chaos. One was a massive barge carrying a salt mining rig. It got caught in the current and was swept into the lake basin, where it was swallowed by the whirlpool remnants. The landscape was in violent flux. For 2 days, the Gulf poured into the Peigneur Basin. A 50-foot waterfall formed where the canal met the lake bed. It became a bizarre tourist attraction. Eventually, the water pressure equalized. The hole was likely plugged with mud, silt, and the wreckage it had swallowed. The basin filled with deep, salty ocean water, not the shallow, fresh water it once held. When the mud finally settled, Lake Peigneur was reborn. It was no longer a 10-foot deep freshwater lake. It was now a 200-foot deep saltwater lake. A few days later, a final, almost comical aftermath unfolded. 9 of the 11 barges popped back up to the surface. One last weird twist in a story that was already full of them. In a disaster of this magnitude, with a whirlpool swallowing a lake, an oil rig, and acres of land, you'd expect a tragic loss of life. But here's the most incredible part. No one died. Not a single person. It's a testament to quick thinking, luck, and courage. The story of survival begins with the 51 miners deep underground. The drill broke through. Their escape was heroic. When the order to evacuate came, they didn't panic. They followed training and moved to the main elevator shaft. They navigated dark, winding tunnels as air pressure shifted and a terrifying roar echoed. It was a race against rising water. Every miner reached the elevator cars and was lifted to the surface, emerging into daylight as their subterranean world was destroyed. Up on the oil rig, 11 crewmen faced a narrow escape. The platform listed violently. They had seconds to act. No time to gather belongings. They abandoned the rig, scrambled onto a tugboat and gunned the engine, pulling away just before the rig capsized and sank. Then there was the lone fisherman, Kerry Bowden, out on the lake that morning. He noticed his boat moving when it shouldn't have been. He started the engine, but the current was too strong. The boat was being pulled toward the whirlpool. He grounded the boat in the shallows and scrambled ashore, watching in disbelief as the lake he had fished his whole life vanished. From deep underground to the lake's surface, people made the right choices at the right time, turning potential tragedy into a story of survival. Had they hesitated, they'd have gone down. Their quick decisions saved their lives. It's a testament to quick thinking, luck, and courage under the most extraordinary circumstances. When the chaos subsided, the people of southern Louisiana were left to survey the damage. The environmental impact was staggering. A 1,300-acre freshwater lake home to bass and bream was now a deep, saltwater body filled with redfish and shrimp from the Gulf. The entire ecosystem had been flipped on its head overnight. The beautiful live oak gardens were partially destroyed, with acres of priceless botanical specimens and ancient trees gone forever. The Diamond Crystal Salt Company ceased to exist, its massive mine completely flooded and inaccessible. The local economy, which relied on both the mine and the tourism from the gardens, took a massive hit. The human cost, while thankfully not measured in lives, was still significant. Hundreds of miners were suddenly out of a job. The company they had worked for, that their fathers and grandfathers had worked for, was gone in an afternoon. The community was in shock. The disaster led to a flurry of lawsuits. Diamond Crystal Salt sued Texaco and its drilling contractor. Texaco, in turn, sued Diamond Crystal. In the end, out-of-court settlements were reached. Texaco and Wilson Brothers paid $32 million to Diamond Crystal and another $12.8 million to the Live Oak Gardens to compensate for the damages. It was a lot of money, but it couldn't bring back the old lake or the lost jobs. The disaster served as a brutal lesson in the importance of careful planning and accurate surveying. The entire catastrophe boiled down to a simple, fatal error, a miscalculation of a few hundred feet. The drilling team thought they were in a safe location based on the maps they had, but the maps were wrong. It was a stark reminder that when you're doing dirty jobs that involve punching holes in the earth, you have to measure twice and cut once. The incident led to stricter regulations and a much greater emphasis on precise geological mapping for any drilling operations near sensitive underground structures like mines. Today, if you visit Lake Peigneur, you might not even know the disaster happened. The water is calm, the shores are green again. It's a popular spot for saltwater fishing. But the lake is different. It's deeper, saltier, and it holds a secret. It stands as a permanent monument to that bizarre day in 1980 when a tiny mistake caused a lake to drain down a hole like a cosmic bathtub. It's a story about the awesome power of nature, the fallibility of man, and the incredible luck that ensured no one was there to pay the ultimate price. It's a reminder that the ground beneath our feet isn't always as solid as it looks.